Pregnant cowgirl left alone, until seductive preacher calls her child a blessing, not a shame. The weight of whispers. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Redemption Creek, casting long shadows between the weathered wooden buildings. Sarah Mae Jenkins pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, not from cold, but from the burning stares that followed her every step. At 22, she had once been the pride of the town, the spirited daughter of rancher Tom Jenkins, known for her skill with horses and her infectious laugh that could brighten even the gloomiest saloon. Now 6 months pregnant and abandoned, she was nothing more than whispered gossip and disapproving glances. "There goes that Jenkins girl again," Mrs. Hartwell muttered to her companion as they stood outside Miller's General Store. "Shame on her, parading around in her condition without a husband in sight." Sarah Mae's hands instinctively moved to her rounded belly, feeling the gentle kick of the life growing within her. Each step down the wooden boardwalk felt like walking through quicksand, the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. The same townspeople who had once tipped their hats respectfully now turned away, their wives pulling their children closer, as if her mere presence might contaminate their moral fiber. The afternoon heat shimmered off the red clay road, and Sarah Mae paused to catch her breath near the old oak tree that marked the center of town. Her father's ranch lay 3 miles south, but the journey felt endless in her current state. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and she whispered softly, "I know, little one. I know you're tired of all this walking too." Behind her, the sound of boots on wood announced another presence. Sarah Mae turned to see Deputy Marshal Jake Morrison approaching, his badge catching the sunlight. Unlike the others, his expression held no judgment, only the weariness of a man who had seen too much of life's hardships. "Miss Jenkins," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "you shouldn't be walking so far in this heat. Can I escort you home?" Sarah Mae's throat tightened with gratitude. Jake had been one of the few who hadn't turned his back on her when the scandal broke. "I appreciate the offer, Deputy, but I can manage. I've got some business at the Mercantile." Jake nodded, understanding the fierce independence that had always defined her. "Well, if you change your mind, I'll be making rounds for another hour or so." He paused, his weathered face softening. "Sarah Mae, don't let their words poison your heart. You're stronger than the lot of them combined." As Jake continued his patrol, Sarah Mae pushed open the door to Miller's Mercantile, the familiar scent of leather, tobacco, and dried goods filling her nostrils. The bell above the door chimed, and conversations immediately died as heads turned in her direction. Mrs. Chen, the Chinese merchant's wife, quickly averted her gaze while old Mr. Patterson made a show of examining the flour sacks with sudden intensity. "What can I do for you, Miss Jenkins?" Henry Miller's voice was professionally neutral, but Sarah Mae caught the slight tension in his shoulders. "I need some fabric for baby clothes," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Something soft and practical. The silence in the store was deafening. Sarah Mae could feel the weight of every eye upon her, could practically hear the mental calculations of those trying to determine exactly when she had fallen from grace. She ran her fingers over a bolt of pale yellow cotton, imagining the tiny clothes she would sew by lamplight in the evenings. "That's a fine choice," Miller said quietly, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "My wife always said yellow was good for babies, works for boys or girls alike." A harsh laugh from the back of the store cut through the moment. "Seems to me she should have thought about baby clothes before she got herself in this predicament," came the voice of Ezra Blackwood, the town's most vocal moral guardian. Sarah Mae's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "I'll take 2 yards of the yellow and 1 yard of the white cotton, please." As Miller cut the fabric, Sarah Mae felt the familiar ache in her lower back intensify. The baby seemed to sense her stress, moving restlessly within her womb. She placed a protective hand over her belly, whispering a silent promise that she would provide for this child, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. The mercantile door chimed again, and Sarah Mae glanced up to see a stranger enter, a man in his early 30s with kind eyes and a gentle bearing. He wore the simple black suit of a traveling preacher, his Bible tucked under one arm. Unlike the others, he didn't stare at her condition with judgment or curiosity. Instead, he simply nodded politely and moved toward the counter. "Good afternoon, folks," he said, his voice carrying a warm authority that seemed to ease the tension in the room. "I'm Pastor Michael Thornton. I'll be holding services in the old barn on Sunday, if anyone's interested in joining us for worship." Sarah Mae watched as the townspeople's attitudes shifted, their backs straightening with the presence of a man of God. She gathered her fabric and prepared to leave, but Pastor Thornton's voice stopped her. "Ma'am, might I offer to carry your packages? It's quite warm today, and I imagine the walk home isn't easy." For a moment, Sarah Mae was speechless. When was the last time someone had offered her simple kindness without expecting something in return? Thank you, but I don't want to impose." "No imposition at all," he said with a gentle smile. It's what neighbors do for each other. As they stepped out into the blazing afternoon sun, Sarah May felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the simple comfort of not being alone. Pastor Thornton walked beside her at an easy pace, his presence a shield against the curious stares and whispered comments that usually followed her through town. "Are you new to Redemption Creek?" she asked, grateful for the distraction from her own troubles. "Just arrived yesterday," he replied. "I've been traveling through Texas, bringing God's word to communities that don't have regular ministers. Sometimes the most important work happens in the smallest places." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the dust of the road kicking up around their feet. Sarah May found herself stealing glances at this stranger, who had shown her more kindness in 5 minutes than her own neighbors had in months. "The baby's due in the spring," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the admission. Pastor Thornton smiled. "Spring babies are special. They come into the world just as everything else is being born anew." He paused, looking at her with those kind eyes. "Every child is a blessing, Miss Jenkins." Sarah May Jenkins. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Not everyone would agree with you about the blessing part." "Then they don't understand the nature of God's love," he said simply, "or the miracle of new life." As they reached the fork in the road that led to her father's ranch, Sarah May felt a strange reluctance to say goodbye. For the first time in months, she had felt like a human being, rather than a cautionary tale. "Thank you for the kindness, Pastor Thornton. It means more than you know." He tipped his hat, his eyes holding a warmth that seemed to reach into her very soul. "I'll be at the old barn Sunday morning at 10 if you'd like to join us for service. Everyone's welcome." As Sarah May walked the final mile to the ranch, she felt the baby settle peacefully within her, as if even the unborn child had sensed the gentle spirit of the man they'd just met. For the first time in months, she found herself looking forward to Sunday morning. The sun was setting behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah May placed her hand on her belly and whispered, "Maybe, just maybe, little one, we're not as alone as we thought." The barn of second chances. Sunday morning arrived with a crisp clarity that made the Texas landscape shimmer like a painting. Sarah May stood before her small mirror, braiding her auburn hair with trembling fingers. The yellow dress she'd chosen, one of the few that still fit comfortably, had been let out twice to accommodate her growing belly. She'd spent the night before sewing, her needle moving by lamplight as she reinforced the seams and added small touches that made her feel more presentable. The walk to town felt different this morning. Where Friday's journey had been heavy with judgment and whispered accusations, today carried the lightness of possibility. The old barn where Pastor Thornton would hold services sat on the edge of town, its weathered wood silvered by decades of Texas sun and rain. Sarah May had passed it countless times, but today it seemed to glow with promise. As she approached, she could hear voices drifting from within, not the hushed, reverent tones of the traditional church, but something warmer, more alive. A small group had gathered, the Petersons with their 3 young children, old Manuel Rodriguez, who worked the livery stable, Mrs. Chen and her teenage daughter, and surprisingly, Deputy Marshal Jake Morrison. Sarah May hesitated at the threshold, her courage faltering. Even here, in this place of supposed acceptance, she felt the familiar weight of her condition. The baby kicked, as if sensing her anxiety, and she placed a steadying hand on her belly. "Sarah May," Pastor Thornton's voice carried across the barn, warm and welcoming. "I'm so glad you came." He approached with that same gentle smile that had disarmed her on Friday, taking her elbow with the easy courtesy of a true gentleman. "Come, let's find you a comfortable seat. I know standing for long periods can be challenging." The small congregation turned as he led her to a wooden chair near the front, not hidden in the back where shame might dictate, but positioned where she could see and be seen. Sarah May caught Mrs. Peterson's surprised glance, followed by a small, uncertain smile. Jake Morrison tipped his hat in acknowledgement, and even Manuel Rodriguez nodded respectfully. "Friends," Pastor Thornton began, his voice carrying easily through the barn's rafters, "we gather this morning not as judges of one another, but as fellow travelers on the road of life. Each of us carries burdens, each of us has stumbled, and each of us is in desperate need of grace." Sarah May felt her shoulders begin to relax. This was different from the fire and brimstone sermons she'd grown up with, different from the condemnation that had been her constant companion these past months. "I want to tell you about a woman I met in my travels," Pastor Thornton continued, his eyes sweeping the small congregation. "She was with child, unmarried, and facing the judgment of her community. People whispered about her, called her names, made her feel less than human. But do you know what I saw when I looked at her?" He paused, letting the silence build. Sarah May felt her heart racing, wondering if he was talking about her, if this was some kind of public humiliation disguised as ministry. "I saw courage," he said, his voice strengthening. "I saw a woman carrying life within her body, shouldering responsibility that many would flee from. I saw someone who, despite the world's cruelty, chose to nurture rather than destroy, to hope rather than despair. Tears began to well in Sarah May's eyes. She had expected judgment, condemnation, the familiar recitation of her failures. Instead, she was hearing words that made her feel human again. The Bible tells us that God looks at the heart, not the circumstances. When the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery to Jesus, expecting him to condemn her, what did he do? Pastor Thornton's gaze found Sarah May's eyes. He told her that he didn't condemn her. He told her to go and sin no more, but first, he showed her love. Old Manuel Rodriguez cleared his throat, his weathered hands folding and unfolding in his lap. Pastor, some might say that's making excuses for sin, and some might say that's missing the point entirely. Pastor Thornton replied gently, sin is real, Manuel. We all carry it. But condemnation? That's not our job. Our job is to love, to support, to help each other carry the burdens that threaten to crush us. He moved closer to Sarah May, and she felt the entire congregation's attention focus on her. Her instinct was to shrink back, to make herself invisible, but something in the pastor's eyes held her steady. Miss Jenkins, he said softly, would you stand for a moment? Sarah May's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment of public humiliation she'd been dreading. But Pastor Thornton's expression held no cruelty, only gentle encouragement. She rose slowly, her hand instinctively moving to support her lower back. The baby seemed to sense the moment's importance, settling peacefully within her. Friends, Pastor Thornton said, his voice carrying authority that commanded attention, I want you to look at Sarah May Jenkins. Really look at her. What do you see? The barn fell silent except for the rustle of wind through the old boards. Sarah May felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely protected by the pastor's presence. I see a woman who could have taken an easy path but chose a difficult one. I see someone who is bringing new life into this world despite the cost to herself. I see courage in the face of judgment, strength in the face of abandonment. Mrs. Peterson shifted in her seat, her expression thoughtful. Her youngest child, a boy of perhaps 4, tugged at her sleeve. Mama, why is the lady crying? Because sometimes, Mrs. Peterson said softly, we cry when people say nice things about us, especially when we haven't heard nice things in a long time. Pastor Thornton smiled at the child's innocent observation. Out of the mouths of babes, he murmured, then louder, this child that Sarah May carries, this is not a mistake or a burden or a source of shame. This is a miracle. This is God's way of saying that life continues, that hope endures, that love finds a way. He reached out and with infinite gentleness, placed his hand on Sarah May's belly. The baby kicked immediately, as if responding to his touch. This little one will be born into a world that may judge them before they take their first breath. But in this barn, in this moment, let's make a declaration. This child is wanted. This child is welcome. This child is a blessing. Sarah May felt something break open inside her chest. Months of held-back tears, suppressed pain, and carefully guarded hope. She sobbed, not from shame but from relief, from the overwhelming sensation of being seen and valued. Amen, came a voice from the back of the barn. Sarah May turned to see Deputy Marshal Jake Morrison standing, his hat in his hands. Amen to that. One by one, the others stood as well. Mrs. Peterson, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Manuel Rodriguez, nodding with the dignity of a man who had faced his own share of judgment. Even Mrs. Chen, who rarely spoke in public, whispered her own quiet, Amen. Pastor Thornton's hand remained on Sarah May's belly, warm and steady. Whatever brought you to this moment, Sarah May, that's between you and God. What matters now is how we move forward, and you won't be moving forward alone. As the congregation began to disperse, Sarah May found herself surrounded by people who had ignored her for months. Mrs. Peterson approached first, her youngest child clinging to her skirts. Sarah May, I owe you an apology. I've been so worried about what people would think if I was seen talking to you. That was wrong of me. You don't owe me anything, Sarah May replied, wiping her eyes. I do, Mrs. Peterson insisted, and I'd like to make it right. I have some baby clothes that my children have outgrown. They're just sitting in a trunk doing no one any good. Would you accept them? Before Sarah May could answer, Manuel Rodriguez stepped forward. Miss Jenkins, I run the livery stable. If you ever need transportation to town, especially when your time comes, you just send word. No charge. Mrs. Chen, speaking in her careful English, added, I make good soup. Very strengthening for new mothers. I will bring some by your ranch. Sarah May looked around at these faces, people who had been her neighbors all her life but had become strangers these past months. Now they were offering not just acceptance, but active support. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you'll let us help, Jake Morrison said quietly. Say you'll let us be the community we should have been all along. As the group began to plan practical ways to support Sarah May through her pregnancy and beyond, Pastor Thornton stood back, watching with satisfaction. This was why he had come to Redemption Creek, not just to preach but to heal, to restore, to build bridges where walls had been erected. The sun was high overhead now, streaming through the barn's windows and casting everything in golden light. Sarah May felt the baby move again, a gentle reminder of the life growing within her. For the first time in months, she felt not just hope, but genuine excitement about the future. "Pastor Thornton," she said as the others continued their planning, "I can't thank you enough for what you've done today." He smiled, that same gentle expression that had first drawn her to trust him. "I didn't do anything, Sarah May. I just helped everyone see what was already there, a woman worth supporting and a child worth celebrating." As they prepared to leave the barn, Sarah May realized that this morning had changed something fundamental in her life. She was no longer the town's cautionary tale, no longer the woman to be whispered about and avoided. She was Sarah May Jenkins, soon-to-be mother, supported by her community and blessed by a love she was only beginning to understand. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and Sarah May smiled. "I think someone approves of our new friends, little one." The threads of connection. The following weeks brought a transformation that Sarah May could hardly believe. What had begun as a single Sunday morning in an old barn had rippled outward, touching lives and changing hearts throughout Redemption Creek. The yellow fabric she had purchased at Miller's Mercantile had been joined by contributions from her newfound supporters. Soft flannel from Mrs. Peterson, delicate lace trim from Mrs. Chen, and even a small rocking chair that Manuel Rodriguez had crafted in the evenings after his work at the livery stable. Sarah May's kitchen table had become a hub of activity. On Wednesday afternoons, the women of the community gathered for what they had dubbed sewing circles. Though the conversations ranged far beyond needlework, Mrs. Peterson brought her mending, Mrs. Chen taught the others delicate embroidery stitches, and Sarah May found herself at the center of a community she had never expected to join. "Hold still, dear," Mrs. Peterson said, her mouth full of pins as she adjusted the hem of a tiny white gown. "This little one is going to be the best-dressed baby in all of Texas." Sarah May laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "You're all spoiling us terribly. I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness." "Kindness doesn't need repaying," Mrs. Chen said in her careful English, her needle moving in precise, beautiful patterns. "It needs passing forward." The baby kicked as if in agreement, and Sarah May placed her hand on her belly. At 7 months, the child was becoming more active, and she could sometimes make out the shape of a tiny foot or elbow pressing against her skin. "Has Pastor Thornton been by lately?" Mrs. Peterson asked, her tone carefully casual. Sarah May felt heat rise in her cheeks. Michael, she had begun thinking of him as Michael, though she was careful to maintain proper address in public, had indeed been visiting regularly. He came by twice a week, ostensibly to check on her welfare and discuss spiritual matters, but their conversations had evolved into something deeper, more personal. "He stopped by yesterday," Sarah May admitted. "He's been helping me prepare for the baptism ceremony after the baby's born." What she didn't mention was how their conversations had begun to venture into territory that had nothing to do with theology. Michael had shared stories of his travels, his reasons for entering the ministry, and the loneliness that came with a life lived on the road. Sarah May had found herself opening up about her dreams for the future, her fears about single motherhood, and the growing hope that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life worth living. "He's a good man," Mrs. Peterson said, her knowing smile suggesting she understood more than Sarah May had revealed. "A woman could do worse than a preacher for a husband." "Now don't go getting ideas," Sarah May protested, but her protests lacked conviction. The truth was, she had been getting ideas. Dangerous, hopeful ideas about what it might mean to have a true partner in life. The kitchen door opened, and Deputy Marshal Jake Morrison stepped inside, his hat in his hands. "Afternoon, ladies. Hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just gossip and baby clothes," Mrs. Peterson said with a grin. "What brings you by, Jake?" Jake's expression grew serious. "I wanted to talk to Sarah May about something. There's been some talk around town. Nothing serious, but I thought she should know." Sarah May's stomach tightened. She had been so caught up in her newfound happiness that she had almost forgotten the world outside her small circle of supporters. "What kind of talk?" "Ezra Blackwood's been stirring up some of the more traditional folks. He's not happy about the changes in town, about the way people have been treating you. He's been saying that Pastor Thornton's got everyone fooled, that he's preaching false doctrine." Mrs. Chen's needle paused in its work. "That man has poison tongue, always looking for trouble." "What exactly is he saying?" Sarah May asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Jake shifted uncomfortably. He's claiming that Pastor Thornton's getting too close to you, that it's improper for a man of God to be spending so much time with an unmarried woman in your condition. He's suggesting that maybe the pastor's intentions aren't as pure as they seem. Sarah May felt the familiar burn of shame in her cheeks. Just when she had begun to believe that the worst of the judgment was behind her, it was starting again. That's ridiculous, Mrs. Peterson said firmly. Pastor Thornton has been nothing but proper and respectful. If anything, he's been a blessing to this entire community. I agree, Jake said, but I thought Sarah May should know what's being said so she can be prepared. Before Sarah May could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats caught their attention. Through the window they could see Pastor Thornton riding up the path to the house, his black gelding moving at an easy pace. Sarah May's heart did a small flip at the sight of him, a reaction that had become increasingly common in recent weeks. I should go, Jake said, glancing toward the window. Just be careful, Sarah May. Don't let Blackwood's poison ruin what you've built here. As Jake left, Pastor Thornton knocked on the doorframe, his familiar smile warming the kitchen. Good afternoon, ladies. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just the usual gossip and needlework, Mrs. Peterson said, but her tone held a note of warning. Though I suspect you and Sarah May have some things to discuss. Mrs. Chen began packing up her sewing. We should go. Sarah May needs rest. You don't have to leave on my account, Michael said, but the women were already gathering their things. Some conversations are better had in private, Mrs. Peterson said with a meaningful look at Sarah May. We'll see you tomorrow, dear. After the women left, an unusual tension settled over the kitchen. Sarah May continued her sewing, but her stitches were less precise. Her attention divided between the tiny garment in her hands and the man sitting across from her. How are you feeling? Michael asked, his voice gentle. Better each day, Sarah May replied, then decided to be honest. Though Jake Morrison stopped by with some concerning news, Michael's expression grew serious. Ezra Blackwood? You've heard the talk too? I've heard it. Michael was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against the table. Sarah May, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Sarah May's needle stilled. What is it? Are you comfortable with my visits here? Are you concerned about what people might think about the impropriety of a single man spending time with a woman in your situation? Sarah May studied his face, seeing the genuine concern there. Are you asking if I want you to stop coming? I'm asking if you think I should. Sarah May set down her sewing and looked directly at him. Michael, your visits are the brightest part of my week. If I were to start living my life based on what Ezra Blackwood thinks is proper, I'd have to lock myself in this house and never come out. Relief flickered across his features. Good, because I've been thinking about what Blackwood's been saying, and I've realized something important. What's that? He's right about one thing. My intentions toward you aren't entirely pure. Michael's voice was barely above a whisper, but they're not improper in the way he thinks. Sarah May's heart began to race. What do you mean? Michael stood and moved to the window, his back to her. Sarah May, I came to Redemption Creek to minister to a community in need. I never expected to find someone who would challenge everything I thought I knew about my calling, about my future. Michael, please, let me finish. He turned back to her, his eyes intense. I've been traveling alone for 3 years, telling myself that a preacher's life was meant to be solitary, that I could serve God better without the complications of family, of love. But these past weeks, watching you face adversity with such grace, seeing your strength and your kindness, I've realized that maybe I was wrong. Sarah May felt tears prick at her eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Sarah May Jenkins. I'm saying that I want to be more than just your friend and pastor. I want to be your husband, your partner, and a father to your child. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and fear. Sarah May felt the baby kick, as if responding to the emotional intensity of the moment. Michael, she whispered, I care for you too. More than I should, more than I ever expected to care for anyone again. But I'm not sure it's fair to ask you to take on someone else's child, someone else's mistakes. That child isn't a mistake, Michael said firmly, and I'm not taking on anything. I'm choosing to love you, all of you, including the precious life you're carrying. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Sarah May, I know this is complicated. I know there will be talk that some people will never accept us, but I also know that what I feel for you is real and good and right. Will you at least consider the possibility that we could build a life together? Sarah May looked into his eyes, seeing the love and hope there. The baby kicked again and she placed Michael's hand on her belly. I think someone else is considering it too. Michael's face broke into a radiant smile as he felt the baby move beneath his palm. Is that a yes? It's a maybe, Sarah May said, her own smile matching his. A very strong maybe. As the afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, casting everything in golden light, Sarah May felt a familiar sensation, the feeling of possibility, of hope, of a future that might be even better than she had dared to imagine. Outside, the wind carried the sound of approaching voices. Sarah May looked up to see Ezra Blackwood striding up the path, flanked by two other men she recognized as his most devoted followers. Her moment of joy evaporated, replaced by a familiar knot of anxiety. "Michael," she whispered, "we have company." The test of faith. The confrontation Sarah May had been dreading arrived with the force of a Texas thunderstorm. Ezra Blackwood's heavy boots echoed across the wooden porch as he approached the kitchen door, his two companions, Luther Hayes and Silas Creed, flanking him like sentries. Through the window, Sarah May could see the rigid set of Blackwood's shoulders, the way his jaw worked as he prepared for battle. Michael rose from his kneeling position beside Sarah May's chair, his demeanor shifting from tender suitor to protective guardian. "Stay calm," he murmured to her. "Let me handle this." The sharp rap on the doorframe announced their arrival. Blackwood didn't wait for an invitation before stepping into the kitchen, his pale eyes scanning the scene with obvious disapproval. His gaze lingered on the baby clothes scattered across the table, the intimate setting of the afternoon visit, and most particularly, on the lingering evidence of Michael's proximity to Sarah May. "Pastor Thornton," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority, "I believe we need to have a discussion." "Mr. Blackwood," Michael replied evenly, "how can I help you?" "You can help by explaining what you're doing here, alone with this woman behind closed doors." Blackwood's words were clipped, precise. "It's come to my attention that you've been making regular visits to Miss Jenkins, visits that some in the community find questionable." Sarah May felt her cheeks burn with familiar shame, but Michael's presence beside her provided an anchor of strength. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "Pastor Thornton has been ministering to me during a difficult time. There's nothing improper about pastoral care." "Pastoral care?" Blackwood's laugh was harsh. "Miss Jenkins, I've been a member of this community for 15 years. I've seen my share of so-called pastoral care, and it doesn't usually involve a single man spending hours alone with a woman of questionable virtue." "Watch your tongue, Blackwood." Michael's voice carried a warning edge. "You're in this woman's home, and you'll show her the respect she deserves." "Respect?" Silas Creed spoke up from behind Blackwood. "What respect does she deserve? She's brought shame on this entire community, flaunting her sin for all to see." Sarah May felt the baby kick violently, responding to her surge of anger and stress. She placed a protective hand on her belly, drawing strength from the life within her. "My child is not a sin," she said firmly, "and neither am I." "Your child is the product of sin," Blackwood countered. "And now you're leading this traveling preacher down the same path of temptation." Michael stepped forward, his body creating a barrier between Blackwood and Sarah May. "Mr. Blackwood, I understand your concerns about propriety, but I won't stand here and listen to you attack a woman who's shown more grace and courage than most people possess." "Grace?" Luther Hayes spat. "She's a fallen woman, preacher. Maybe where you come from, men of God consort with such women, but here in Redemption Creek, we have standards." "Standards?" Sarah May surprised herself by rising from her chair, her pregnancy making the movement awkward but determined. "Tell me, Mr. Hayes, what standards were you upholding when you lost your family's farm gambling? Or you, Mr. Creed, when you beat your horse so badly that Doc Patterson had to put it down?" The men's faces flushed with anger at her bold words. Blackwood raised his hand for silence. "We're not here to discuss our failings, Miss Jenkins. We're here to discuss yours, and the poor example you're setting for our community." "The poor example she's setting?" Michael's voice rose slightly. "Gentlemen, I've traveled through dozens of communities across Texas. I've seen real sin, real corruption, real moral decay. What I see here is a woman facing the consequences of her choices with dignity, raising a child under difficult circumstances, and contributing positively to her community." "Contributing positively?" Blackwood's eyebrows rose mockingly. "By teaching our young women that there are no consequences for immoral behavior, by showing them that loose conduct will be rewarded with sympathy and support." Sarah May felt tears of frustration burning behind her eyes. "What would you have me do, Mr. Blackwood? Disappear? Abandon my child? Hide away in shame until I die? I'd have you acknowledge your sin publicly, repent before the community, and accept the consequences of your actions without dragging others down with you." "She has acknowledged her situation," Michael said. "She's facing it with more courage than most people would. And if you're so concerned about sin and consequences, perhaps you should examine your own heart. The Bible speaks quite clearly about the sin of judgment, about the danger of throwing stones when you live in glass houses." Blackwood's face darkened. "Don't quote scripture at me, boy. I've been reading the Bible since before you were born." "Then perhaps you should read it more carefully," Michael replied, "because the Jesus I know spent his time with tax collectors and sinners, with the outcast and the downtrodden. He reserved his harshest words for the self-righteous, for those who burdened others with condemnation while failing to show mercy. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Sarah May's labored breathing. The stress of the confrontation was taking its toll, and she could feel the baby's distressed movements within her. "Sarah May," Michael said softly, noticing her distress. "You should sit down." "I'm fine," she said, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. "No, you're not," Blackwood said coldly. "You're exactly what I expected you to be. A woman who can't handle the consequences of her choices, who needs constant support and coddling because she's too weak to stand on her own."